We're going to go ahead and transition into session 6, New Perspectives on Water Data, which will be moderated by Stacy Timmons from the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources at New Mexico Tech. Stacy directs the Hydrogeology Division and Aquifer Mapping Program, which she has been involved with for the past 15 years. Additionally, Stacy has served on the Water Quality Control Commission and Interstate Stream Commission since 2019 and is leading the implementation of the Water Data Act legislation. Stacy, thank you for your dedication to hydrologic and geologic research and your contribution to this conference. I will hand the session over to you to introduce your panel. Thank you.
So I'm going to first say that this is hard to follow that previous panel. What a bunch of good discussion. I'm not only going to moderate, but I'm going to also give you guys a little bit of update on how we're doing things in New Mexico with water data. But to begin with, I want to just say that this is really cool and nerdy that we have a panel on water data. So thank you all for joining us, and a really big thanks to WRI for hosting this conference in this new online format. It's a huge shift from the previous 64 years of conference, and so I'm really impressed with this year's conference. And for those of you guys here today to engage with us on this panel, I hope you will send questions in the comment box and we'll try to address them, but also reach out to me directly if you're wanting to talk more about New Mexico's water data. So real quick to just introduce myself, I'm a hydrogeologist and I've been working at the State Survey for now 16 years. And when I think back to how my career in hydrogeology began kind of in the early 2000s or so, I thought, thinking about like building a new research project, the first step is to go get data. And of course, in my world, I envisioned going out and collecting field data, making measurements, collecting samples, but really often starts with going through existing data, work that's already been done. And so it surprised me how much time was needed to hunt down that data and make use of it. And I actually spent so I think the difficulties of accessing water is kind of, in New Mexico, is one of those things that's like the issue that no one wants to talk about. So we really seldom acknowledge it. It's like that spooky skeleton in the closet. Getting ready for Halloween here. There are certainly no panels at water conferences that I was aware of that were talking about water data. So I'm excited to have this opportunity. So, gosh, slides advancing. So fortunately, I think since the early 2000s, we've definitely made some improvements, and we have a wide variety of websites and tools available where we can access data in a variety of forms. On the screen here, you can see the Office of the State Engineer's Water Rights Reporting System, the Bureau of Geology's interactive map where you can go to get information about geology or groundwater data, WRI's statewide water assessment application, a lot of data at the NMED's various portals. I have the drinking water portal on here and the interactive map where there is a ton of water and environmental data. And so while these websites are handy, I think a lot of us have difficulty of just trying to answer some of our basic questions, like, is our water safe to drink? Are we running out where I live? It turns out, to me, it seems like looking for the data that you need to answer those basic questions, and then how to use that data requires a bit of training or some expertise on how to use that data. So in 2019, New Mexico made a big move to begin facing that challenge, to stare down that skeleton in the closet and start addressing our water data challenges. And we adopted this new statute, the New Mexico Water Data Act, which came from legislation that was led by Representative Melanie Stansberry, who we just heard from, and Representative Gail Armstrong, with a lot of other supporters in the legislature and those around the legislature. So the Water Data Act is a really big step toward opening up our state's water data. Basically, it's asking us to make the water data more accessible and interoperable. And I've been helping to lead this effort with a solid implementation team and a lot of collaboration from the various state agencies, as well as a lot of other water-related data organizations in New Mexico. So for this panel, I am not going to go into the technical details of how this is all coming together, but what I want to be clear is that we're not trying to build another database. What we're really trying to do is push a more fundamental paradigm shift in how we share our data. So really what we're not asking people to like, here, Stacy, here's my data, put it in your data portal. But instead, what we're trying to do is help data providers expose their data in data that they're ready to share, data that's been QC'd, that they're comfortable with sharing, and provide it in a machine readable format. You can see on the screen the API. So API is application programming interface. It's basically, we're asking people to make that data machine readable and available that way. And from there, we can then aggregate the data with other data. We can integrate it with similar data from other agencies. And then it can be used to answer some of those basic questions that people are thinking about. And also with that data, it can be more readily accessed to improve water models, to help in water planning, to help us build a resilient future here in New Mexico in the face of climate change, and perhaps build some consensus around some of those big water issues and heated debates. So this is really a multi-year effort that's well underway now, and I acknowledge that a lot of our data is already online in some form. We're working to make those data even more accessible, especially to computers in that machine readable format that I talked about. The benefit of this is that it really opens our data up to being used in various tools and applications. So I kind of, my mental picture for that is like Google Maps, but for water, on water themes. So the website link for our current status is there on the screen. Feel free to check it out and give us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And I actually really do want to hear from you about what kind of data you're looking for and how do you want to find it so that we can build the right tools that will help address some of those common questions. And we also have a data catalog where we've started to put together our electronic data inventory. And I just want to note that that inventory started from the state water plan and a lot of work that went into that technical report for that. Sorry. Yeah. So I just want to acknowledge that it's been a huge honor to have the chance to work on water data for New Mexico and to get to collaborate with all of the different state agency partners and our different working groups. I know there's a lot of you on the meeting here now. I think I lost track of the account, but those of you guys attending, there's like 160 people here, so it's kind of cool. And I've also been really impressed with the outreach and engagement that we have received in New Mexico to address our water challenges from outside of the state, especially some of the folks who are on the panel here with me today. And I'm gonna just quickly give a quick intro to the other panelists, and then I'll ask them to begin their presentation. So first of all, the Internet of Water has been an absolute pleasure to work with, and New Mexico is one of their first pilots to work with on state water data challenges. And for those of you who don't know, we are hugely benefiting from their team's expertise and knowledge on water data and data architecture. And so Ashley Ward is going to talk about that here today. The West Big Data Innovation Hub, specifically Meredith Lee, has been a really big supporter for New Mexico's efforts on water data. And I'm really glad that they've even included New Mexico in their Water Data Challenge Hackathon event this year. And I am thrilled to be working on this effort with NMED staff, particularly Gunnar Johnson, who is helping us put together, we have a data challenge team that's building a tool to help us think about how the changes in the waters of the US definitions are going to affect people on the ground in New Mexico. And then we'll hear from Adel Abdallah, who's here from the Western States Water Council. And that group uses a lot of New Mexico's water use data in their WADE data portal, which I'm sure we'll hear about. So first, we'll hear from Ashley. So I think I have your slides here, Ashley. Next. And Ashley, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a quick introduction to yourself and tell us about Internet of Water's work on state data.
Great, okay. Thanks, Stacy. So I am Ashley Ward. I am the Engagement and Outreach Associate with the Internet of Water. The Internet of Water is a project that's located at Duke University's Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions. That's a mouthful. And our mission is to facilitate a modern water data infrastructure across the US. I mean, no big deal, right? So we do this, though, through close partnerships with public agencies like we have in New Mexico, but also through partnerships with NGOs and utilities and private industry and universities. And, you know, these activities within these partnerships vary and are directly responsive to what the partner needs are. And so at times this means that we're developing technical solutions to support, you know, the development of a modern water data infrastructure. At other times it means addressing the cultural aspects of a modernized water data infrastructure, like concerns over capacity and security and the need to think differently, as Stacy was just talking about water data management and the need to demonstrate why investment should be made in improving water data infrastructure. And so for today, one of the questions that Stacy asked me was to think about how does this effort support research? You can go ahead, that was fine, Stacy. And so I came up with a quick short list of some examples to give you, and I'm happy to answer more questions about these. But the first step is improving discoverability of water data. So lots of water data is collected, little of it is integrated with each other, in part because, you know, who knows where it is or what's available. It requires a particular technical expertise to find it. If you wanted to think about it this way and something completely removed, you could say, if you wanted to look up movies playing in theaters in Albuquerque, New Mexico, you could Google movies Albuquerque, and you'd get a list of movie theaters about what's playing and the locations relative to Albuquerque. But what if you were in a situation in which you Googled movies in Albuquerque, and what you received instead was sort of an extensive list of random theaters across New Mexico or broader region, movie reviews, even from old movies, some interviews from actresses and actors. You know, that would make it a lot more difficult to find the information you need in a timely manner. And so before this conference, I Googled Navajo Lake, and I received 9.9 million hits on Google and found all kinds of interesting information about State Park, about camping there, a Wikipedia article, but no links, at least in the immediate search, to organizations and data sets about Navajo Lake. And so GeoConnects is a product that the Internet of Water is developing in concert with the USGS, which is a search index for water data. It operates a lot like a Google, right, for water data. By linking water data to its location, GeoConnects enables the discovery of that data. So in this graphic, what you have is what we have currently. You know, a person Googles about a certain body of water, and what is returned is maybe some relevant data sources. If you go to the next slide, what GeoConnects hopes to accomplish is by connecting that data with a real world geography. When you then Google, say, data on Navajo Lake, what you would actually receive is a list of data sources collected to any relevant data sources collected about Navajo Lake and surrounding areas, and in some cases upstream and downstream, right? And so this easing of discovery saves time. It makes for more efficient data acquisition, and it does so without the need of added technical expertise. Next slide. So a second issue, fragmentation. So data fragmentation remains a significant issue and makes data also difficult to find, but also very costly to process. And so HubKit is a data integration software kit that will be open source that gives organizations the ability to create their own water data hub. And this is very similar to what Stacy is talking about that New Mexico is currently doing, right? The idea behind HubKit is that instead of having to go to multiple locations to get a complete data set, as you see in the graphic on your left, a data hub allows you to go to one location that would then connect you to all of those other data sets. This reduces time, it saves money, it makes for more efficient data acquisition. And because most of the time water data hubs require certain data standards and metadata standards, it makes the data processing end of it also much easier for researchers. Next slide. I also want to talk a little bit more directly about how modern water data infrastructure can actually expand and enhance research. Having access, so for example, one of the tools that we're creating is this About Us tool for utility public service boundary areas. Sorry, I have too many words to say. And so the idea behind this tool is create smart interactive tool that allows utility managers to edit and update the digital boundaries of their service areas. Now, why is this important? Having access to these digital boundary areas improves greatly the ability to conduct research, and also it supports policy efforts. For example, epidemiological research on water contaminant exposure and social science research on infrastructure access disparities are all greatly improved by an accurate delineation between areas served by one water utility or another, or a water utility and those served by groundwater wells. And so in North Carolina, up to this point, these studies have relied upon outdated pipe location data. But having digitized service boundaries means that researchers can overlay them on top of other data, opening up a whole new set of questions, potentially, but also clarifying the questions that they're already asking. And so this is an important contribution that this kind of modern water data infrastructure can serve. Next slide. And so just quickly to wrap it up, when we think about how a modern water data infrastructure can improve research, we think about improving discoverability with more efficient data acquisition, but also improving data processing through data standards and metadata standards. The ability to ask new questions or illuminate more the questions that you're currently asking, because you now have access to integrate data sets with each other in ways that you couldn't before. And all of this means that there's an increase in transparency around what's going on, but also the emphasis on standards means that there's an increase in trust of data. So it's clear through the metadata how the data is collected and managed, and it's also clear the different standards that, and in some cases, if you're thinking about, for example, NGO data, and the tiered for QA/QC for different data would be obvious and easy for people to find out. So those are just some big ways in which the Internet of Water project and the promotion of sort of a modern water data infrastructure helps research, especially in New Mexico for sure, but nationwide, and helps New Mexico, folks in New Mexico who are doing research also connect with in the region or broader nation efforts. Thanks, Stacy.
Sorry, too many buttons. Stopping my screen share here. Thank you, Ashley. We'll move over to Meredith.
Is that big enough for folks to see?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Stacy, and to all of the organizers for having me here. I'm always so impressed by the breadth of community perspectives that are convened year after year. I haven't been to all 65 of the New Mexico water conferences, but the ones I have participated in, and really any workshop that this team pulls together, it's always super productive. I think the legislative representatives that we just heard from, right alongside researchers and community leaders and the hundreds who are tuning in or watching this maybe afterwards, it's just such a prime example of the breadth of collaboration needed. Since my colleague Ashley covered so nicely some of the topics of discoverability and data acquisition and processing and research questions, transparency, trust, like it was like bingo. So I think I will take a slightly more meta perspective in walking through these slides in the interest of time, but I'm happy to connect offline if folks want more specific details. If we reflect on the West Big Data Innovation Hub, which is one of 4 National Science Foundation big data innovation hubs in the US, bridging research, education, and a community of practice. And if we look specifically in our area of natural resources and hazards, we very quickly, when we launched almost 5 years ago, noted that water physically connects our states in the region and was just a really compelling area to build out activities and initiatives that would allow us to really raise awareness of regional opportunities, inspiring new commitments and contributions like the ones that Stacy mentioned through the Water Data Challenge. The topic allows us to catalyze team formation from a number of different sectors, and that's where the accessibility of water data and the consistent emphasis on bringing in diverse perspectives, centering and valuing different perspectives is so aligned with the topic of this session and the conference overall. And increasingly, we're digging deeper to develop and enable more translational or applied pilot projects in our thematic areas. And this is all held together with this foundational support for data science education, training, and workforce development that is not only incredibly motivating in its own right, but really feeds the ecosystem that we build, capacity to be able to do all these other goals. I'll skip over sort of our overarching portfolio. Everybody in the world has had to pivot due to COVID-19 and so forth. But specifically looking at the natural resources and hazards and water efforts, I wanted to just reflect that the California Water Data Challenge that we've been running now for 3+ years, it's something that, was a unique opportunity given the timing of the first in the nation legislation in California for the Open and Transparent Water Data Act in 2016, much like the Water Data Act that Stacy just mentioned, 1978-72-4B. The fact that I can rattle off that and AB 1755 shows how much we have really dove in, I guess pun intended, to the water arena. It's worth noting that the state data stewards and community in California and New Mexico and others, we really appreciate that the community is looking at this bigger picture beyond what's required from the legislation. We really see this palpable spirit of collaboration, of rolling up our sleeves to build and test and share and improve iteratively. And I think that enthusiasm and opportunity coming out of the initiative and the open data projects can often be quite colorful. And I've been told by some folks, this looks nothing like a data policy legislation memo. What's the deal with this? And so I often actually refer back to something that Connie Maxwell, who I hope is in the audience based at NMSU, said. We were talking about this, we were discussing ways to connect with students, particularly underrepresented groups that haven't historically had a seat at the table or their voices heard. And Connie said, you know, it really boils down to framing this as plan your future with data. It's a simple concept. I'm not sure, Stacy, if this is nerdy enough on the data perspective, we can do that at the happy hour afterwards, potentially. But the concept of planning your future with data, we've found that it translates across languages, across disciplinary boundaries. It's incredibly powerful in implementation because it intentionally puts people first. And it underscores the sense of agency and seeing that data is a way to assess as a community and as individuals and neighbors where we are right now and how we might prepare for a more resilient future. So that shift to Stacy's point and how we share data and look at it as a bridge towards understanding has led to all sorts of, you know, great results that we've been able to present nationally and globally. I'm sure you all have seen the 10-year fund for safe and affordable drinking water. We're so excited to have New Mexico's data challenge be part of this summer and fall tranche. And if you know anybody with open data projects, we are offering $16,000 of different prizes to recognize those teams working towards the challenge this year. In the interest of time, I'll just skip over the fact that and point you to this website in terms of it being a banner year for trying to engage at all levels, including high school students. We love connecting with New Mexico educators from all different backgrounds, and whether that's around water data or with the focus of training more community members around data science education as part of this much larger network. It's been great to partner with all of the New Mexico stakeholders. So I'll turn it back to Stacy and Adel now.
Thank you so much, Meredith. All right, Adel, please give a quick introduction to yourself, and if you have screen share.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, thank you, Stacy. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I really enjoyed the conference so far, listening in about like the local conversations about water rights. That's really fun for me. Coming from a big picture regional water perspective and listening to the local discussions, that really enriches my perspective. So my name is Adel Abdallah, and I manage the Water Data Exchange Program at the Western States Water Council. So I'll be talking, it's still going to be relevant to the discussions that Meredith and Ashley presented about the regional perspective here. So for those of you, I wish if I was in person to ask you how many of you are familiar with the Western States Water Council. But it's amazing to see 150 folks here on the call. I'm really excited. So for those of you who are not familiar, and I'll try to be really fast here. So the Western States Water Council is e-voice for water in the West. Its mission is to ensure that the West has an adequate and secure and sustainable water supply of suitable quality for now and the future to meet the diverse water needs. So we adopt policy positions on behalf of the Western states for Capitol Hill, like voting, stuff like that. Part of the Western States Water Council activities is the Water Data Exchange Program that I manage, which was established in 2012 to formulate a strategy, or like to have a platform to enable Western states to share water data among each other and with federal agencies and the public. So many of you probably know that USGS has a lot of data on surface water discharge. There's the National Groundwater Monitoring Network. there's the Bureau of Reclamation Water Information System, and there's EPA Water Quality Data System. So what Wade brings in here is the unique part that Wade brings in is water rights data, aggregated water use and budget estimates, and site-specific use and withdrawals from the states themselves and regulatory overlays. None of this data is being provided at regional scale or has been before. So Wade is coming here to fill the gap. So quickly, what we do here, we work with every single state agency in the West to bring their data into a generalized database that we built, or a centralized one too, for Wade. And then we enable centralized access and data portals. We're working with the Internet of Water group to integrate that data with the USGS and EPA and reclamation data services. So you can hopefully accomplish the vision that Ashley laid to have the Google for water data. So besides the technical side of things, how we map data from different states, we also try to translate water terminology across states. And we have 32 metadata terms that they're common across the West. And among them, 5 here, they're really super important. So beneficial use for water rights. We have about 350 terms of unique beneficial uses, and we try to map them to 22 to enable filtering that data. And I'll show a quick example of that. And then water sources types from 34 to 5. These were relatively easy, but the most difficult ones, like the legal status of a water right or the water right type, these are really difficult because they have legal implications, and we have our legal committee trying to review and come up with these terms. For example, adjudicated water right. Wyoming, the meaning for that term in Wyoming is different than in New Mexico. So we're trying to be careful as we provide that data across the West. So here is a snapshot of our local dashboard, which is not publicly released yet, but it shows water rights across the West. And these colors are for the 22 beneficial uses that we have so far. So this is, to me, so beautiful. That what keeps me up at night or gets me up in the morning to enable that regional access for water rights. How we enable research, hopefully by answering specific questions like this one. If we clip all this water rights to the Colorado River Basin, we ask a simple question: what were the water rights or the water rights for ag and municipal use prior 1922, which is the compact date. So we have a slider bar that you can go back in that time, and then it shows those water rights that are immune if there to be a call on the river because they're senior to the compact. So these are some of the policy decisions that such data on a regional scale can inform. Another type of data that I'm talking about here today is the aggregate and county water use map, where basically, and any watershed pretty much that the states have. So say in New Mexico, they estimate watershed per county, and we report that consistently across the West. So here we show 3 states, Texas and Utah and New Mexico. In other tabs, like in HUC level or custom watersheds, we have 3 more states as well. We're trying to fill the map pretty much of water use on a regional scale. So you can zoom in. Here's another example for the Bureau of Reclamation watersheds consumptive use for the Colorado. If you click at one of them, it would show you a pie chart of where the water is being used, at what percentage there, and then the time series of that. The WADE program, the first 5 years, it was more to establish the program and build the data system. We're right now in the second phase where we're kind of designing the system to focus on use cases to support research questions, like the one I showed about the Colorado River Basin. And we're looking for the third phase to release this public portal to allow pretty much anyone to answer questions across the West about water use and water rights. We're thankful for all the funders and collaborators and partners, philanthropic groups, federal government funding, and of course the Western states water agencies like the New Mexico Office of State Engineer. Of course, the Internet of Water, Quasi, and our IT contractor, Don't Panic Labs, and USGS. All of them have been wonderful in helping us. I'll leave you with this question for the discussion if we have time. Would this water data for other Western states be helpful to you in New Mexico? And if yes, I would love to hear how, so we can better design the system to answer such questions for you guys. Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. So, Mark, I'm kind of curious how we're doing on time and if we have time to entertain a few questions or at least a discussion amongst the panel.
Oh, yeah, of course. I think that you guys, I definitely want to allow you some time to, either if there's any questions you have amongst yourselves or some audience questions that you'd like to answer, please feel free.
Well, I love the idea of, I wish that this were an in-person thing and we could all kind of talk with all of the audience, and the audience, you can't see each other, panel can see you, but not by video, we're not spying on you. The idea though of having a little bit more feedback from you guys. I know Adel asked the question. I would love to hear as well what kind of water data is exciting or interesting for you all. So if you have comments to those, feel free to suggest how to put it in the Q&A or in the chat window. I think for right now, I wanted to real quickly mention, Ashley, that there are a lot of folks in this meeting that are working for state agencies. And I wanted to know if you have comments or ideas for how that they can engage to learn more about water data challenges, how to put a plug in for the peer-to-peer network.
Thank you so much, Stacy. So one of the efforts of the Internet of Water is, and I should have raised this in my presentation, so I'm so glad you brought it up, Stacy, is the Internet of Water's peer-to-peer network. If you go to the internetofwater.org website and navigate to the Connect with Us menu and peer-to-peer network, the peer-to-peer network now has over 100 members from more than 30 states. And as members, the membership of the peer-to-peer network is for state, local agent and tribal government agency employees. It's also for utilities and river basin commission employees. The purpose of the peer-to-peer network is to connect folks from all across the country who are all working on different data modernization efforts and sort of share what they're doing, successes, lessons learned. We host a forum where people can talk to each other and say, like, what do you do with all this legacy data, for example? We also host webinar series. We have one coming up in which Adel is one of the presenters, a workshop on metadata in November on the 17th and 18th. We've had a lot of success with our webinars. And so we've been very happy with the participation in those. And if you have a good topic that you would like to see addressed, we've talked about water budgeting handbook, sorry. We've talked about an Ask the Data Architect, where people sent questions to our data architect and he answered them in the webinar. We have the one coming up on metadata, and then we have some highlighting some of the work in other states. And so we would love to have you join us, and we hope you will. And if there's a place, I'm happy to put the web link in there. Maybe I should put it in the, I don't know if there's a place where I can put the web link directly, but if there is, I will.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. You can put it in the chat section and just make sure it goes out to all panelists and attendees, and they should be able to see it.
I will do that.
Thank you. I actually, Meredith, I would love to get a little take from you thinking about the West Big Data Hub's various data that they work with and the community of folks that you work with doing these data challenges. Do you see water as being particularly challenging to work with relative to maybe some other sectors of data that you're engaged with?
It's a great question, Stacy. And I thought initially, given that there have been, wars fought over water and movies about wars fought over water, and that context, we thought it would be pretty contentious with water rights that has been mentioned, and the vulnerable community lens where we were shaping our very first water data challenge and trying to get all of these voices and input. As we've sort of, regionally and nationally gone deeper in areas like healthcare and, transportation, mobility, access, all of these areas of social impact have lots of very complex issues around how to navigate the intersection of data and science and people responsibly and in a way that, matches the pace or lack thereof of, policy changes or legal, legacy systems. It's not just the IT systems that are legacy and in need of potential rejuvenation. So I think that was our take initially, that the water area would be hard compared to the others, but there's lots of difficulty all the way around. And I think the opportunity lies in trying to compare what maybe has really resonated to Representative Melanie Stansberry's point in one particular area, seeing what's succeeding and thriving, how you can learn from that, even if it's in an area that's not water, or maybe it's not data, and translate that over to this realm.
Right. Yeah, that's a good, I love the idea of taking something that worked in a whole different sector and a whole different industry on whatever data maybe, and translating it over into the challenges we're working with. So there's a few comments about asking about some of New Mexico's specific challenges that we're facing, and I'll address that, and then perhaps we can talk real briefly about some of the other states' perspectives. The other panelists can see that question. For New Mexico's challenges, I think we're seeing that a lot of our state agencies have real struggles. I think it was alluded to in the panel just before here, but the staffing availability, their budget restrictions or constraints make it very difficult for them to scale up, to build their skills, perhaps to engage on this water data challenge. And so what we really need to be doing is like changing the culture around how we do data. Everybody has their way of doing it right now, and it's hard to envision something new and different when we're just busy keeping up with the day-to-day and trying to make ends meet with the time that we have available. So I think that the comment I would have to some of the biggest challenges here in New Mexico seems to come back to kind of funding these agencies to support an engaged effort here on this. So let's see. So what are some of the most exciting and interesting water data efforts that are coming up across the country? And where are they succeeding, and what can we learn from others? I don't know who wants to start that. Ashley, you're smiling.
I can talk about a couple of things. Let's see. So one of the things that I think is very interesting, and I think the audience on this call might be interested in, is an effort that we are, it's still ongoing, but we finished the first phase in California. So harmful algal blooms is a really big issue of concern, and the California State Water Boards wanted to be able to build a more robust reporting and notification system around harmful algal blooms. However, the ability of the state to do so, monitoring, water bodies throughout the state of California, is cost prohibitive. It's not something that the state can take on themselves. So we worked with the Internet of Water, with the California State Water Boards, worked with a group of NGOs and 2 tribal governments in California to develop a data ingestion model so that non-government entities can easily ingest their monitoring data into the state system, expanding the state capacity around monitoring and notification for harmful algal blooms. So we've just finished this process where we've put together the implementation plan, and now at the beginning of the year we will work to actually implement what was laid out through that stakeholder engagement process. But what's important there is that when we talk about a time in which state capacity is limited and probably going to grow more limited, this is one way in which we can think about how to get more data and how to address those issues about QA/QC and expand state capacity for those types of questions, not just on harmful algal blooms, but I can see that being used for a variety of other topics as well. So I think that's something that's really exciting and maybe of interest to the folks on this call.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, somebody just posted something else about, oh, Meredith did. Go ahead, Meredith.
Oh, I just sent it to all the panelists, and let me send it to all the panelists and attendees. There's another unique effort and sort of governance and consortium structure in California that I wanted people to be aware of. I guess I could say I'm biased because I'm on the board of directors, but I'm an unpaid board of directors member, so I feel confident in sharing that this is quite unique, having the state engagement with our state, chief data officer and the head of the State Water Resources Control Board, and so many other key data stewards and leaders engaged in an official 501c3. We just announced the steering committee this month, and so that's something to stay tuned on for lessons learned and best practices, and friends on the other side of the border trying to make a sustainable partnership around data and data-enabled decision making.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that that link in there, Meredith. And I am seeing a little comment. I'm curious if can we have 5 more minutes? Is that good? Do we have I'm just going to keep talking all afternoon if you guys don't give me a boundary.
Oh, of course. Yeah, five more minutes would be great.
Perfect. I do have one question for Adel, and then I'll jump back over to the chat if we have time. And Adel, I'm curious, thinking about the different states that you've been able to engage with in the West as part of WADE's process. And I bet, I don't know, speaking from my own perspective, the engagement with WADE and being able to share data has been eye-opening for both the states as well as the on your end. Can you talk about any comments that you're hearing from some of your collaborating states and what they've learned in this process of engaging and sharing data to WADE? Is there any thoughts that come to mind on that?
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. So I think the general sense is that since we're trying to generalize how we share and represent data across state lines, we ask questions to our states about like metadata or methods that naturally or like normally they didn't necessarily think about because the data is being used locally, and there was not a purpose to not necessarily to compare, but to look at the data in a bigger picture. So I think it opened their eyes on, oh, we should add these metadata data columns in our data to better describe our own data. That has been kind of the common theme that we heard from our member states saying, thinking that WADE was helpful in that sense. Data is usually, from my personal experience, and the Internet of Water, like one of the findings was that usually data when we have a funding or a state collects data, they collect it for a single purpose, or you can't collect data for all the purposes in the world. And sometimes like the metadata that is documented with it is limited, but when we start like asking the questions for another purpose that the data was not necessarily collected for, then it becomes like states like they start thinking about like additional metadata or a different way that they want to represent the data. I hope that helps.
Yeah, well, I think at least from our perspective in working with New Mexico, agencies. And when we start saying, hey, but where's the metadata? Where's the instructions for how to use this? People start going, oh, okay, let me get back to you. And I think that's a really important point of all of our data practices that we have to remember to have some documentation about it.
And that costs time and money, so that can be annoying too. Say, imagine if your purpose or my purpose, like I want to finish this data collection and share it and then move on, that it becomes sometimes annoying to go back and trying to add those metadata. And it's a process, but I think on the long term, the more we add those metadata, the more value we can get out of that data, pretty much with a minimal additional expense.
Right. And making that part of the practice, the common practice of how we manage our data now and going forward, not just shoving it out in an Excel file. And there you go, deal with it. So
yeah, and it takes some training, and I'm really glad to see all those folks on the call today, because it takes some training kind of to get the bigger picture of what we want to do with this data. And so, yeah, working together always, like, it's, there's an insight from working with other folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to scroll through the questions in the chat. Are there any burning other comments? I'm kind of seeing the time limit. Do you guys want to make any last remarks on water data in New Mexico at this point before we?
Yeah, Stacy, Lily brought up a good point in the panelists about how we're connecting with communities that have less capacity to engage in this way. And I think it's a great point. Meredith, I see you've put a connection, a link to some information. But I think I would also, just a couple of comments, I guess, to directly answer Lily's comment. And I think it's a great one. But some of it, it's not a direct answer to this question, right? There are many components to this question, but some of the ways in which the Internet of Water is trying to address those issues is all of the tools that we create are all open source. Most of them, and so available. There are no proprietary, costs, they're not proprietary software packages, and therefore there's not cost associated with them. A lot of the tools, like the GeoConnects tool that we're developing, are meant to actually allow people with little technical expertise to be able to access the data. And so how does this impact different communities? A lot of what we find ourselves doing is we're kind of the background, the less upfront, more indirect role play that we have there, in the sense that we work with organizations that work in these communities, and we enabling these organizations to have access to data, but also thinking about how that data is delivered with regard to dashboards, making sure that it's communicated in a way that is clear and understandable, and supporting these organizations who work regularly within communities so that they then can deliver information and support the community with this data and information that they have. That's how the Internet of Water has been engaging with different communities that find themselves perhaps outside without capability to be able to engage otherwise.
Yeah, Meredith, did you want to put is that a link that you want to share with the broader community here?
Yes, I have about like 3 to 5 links that I would love to share, because I'm not sure if everybody sees Lily's question based on the Zoom, but it was really pointing to efforts to help connect communities who may not have internet access, broadband, let alone any band, and how to importantly address inherent disparities in privilege or access. One link that I added was to some video recordings early on back in June. Day 1 of the Water Board's Water Data Science Symposium had some great panelist discussion. If you look up the environmental justice community discussion on some of these issues. And I'll send another link as well. I see a lot of parallels to the disaster response and recovery community. And there's a great, 5-minute lightning talk that I can share from a colleague from the FEMA National Advisory Council about thinking about existing infrastructure and what it looks like to ease burden, Dr. Nicolette Lusaint. So I'll share both of those, but it's definitely something that I think would deserve greater emphasis and advocacy to make people aware. Not everybody can just hop on a Zoom, and how are we able to sort of mitigate the inherent systemic inequities in the shift that we're all seeing right now.
Yeah. And I would just add that we're right now working on some outreach efforts through the New Mexico Water Data Act to engage with communities all across the state, and not just by Zoom, hopefully with perhaps it will be printed material for a little while until we can feel safe to go out and meet in person. But I would actually welcome if people have ideas about how we can connect with some of these various communities in our more rural parts of the state. We would love to really hear from them about how they want to find, or if they want to find, what water data. It's on our list and ready to go. So I see Lily's camera is back on. I really just want to quickly say a huge thank you to Ashley, Meredith, and Adel, because you guys jumped in, and this panel has been totally awesome considering all of our time commitments around this. And I appreciate all of your support for our work here in New Mexico on water data. So back to you, Lily. Thanks, everybody.